The boat moved slowly across the harbor as quietly as its splashing paddle wheels and chugging and grinding engine would let it. They were hidden by the fog, and everyone on board knew it was important to stay out of sight. On that dark May night, they were going on a secret and dangerous trip that could change their lives or end them. Even though there were no officers, there was a man on the deck wearing the captain's coat and hat. Robert Smalls was his name, and he planned to use this stolen ship to get himself and everyone below decks out of slavery. Smalls was born on April 5, 1839, in Beaufort, South Carolina, to a slave named Lydia Polite. This was 23 years ago. He had it better than most slave children because his master, Henry McKee, may have been his father. However, his mother wanted him to know the terrible things that black people in the United States had to go through. She taught him hard lessons like making him work in the fields and making him watch someone get whipped. These events formed the man who planned to take over the CSS Planter, a 150-foot sidewheel steamship. He was also one of the best pilots in the harbor. He knew the water so well that he could manage the sandbars and shallows even in the dark. This would help him get away early in the morning, even though his white leaders wouldn't call him a pilot and instead called slaves wheelmen. Smalls planned to be the captain of his own journey. He would try to get away from Charleston. Family commitments. When Smalls's boss sent him to town for the first time, he was 12 years old. Before he joined the crew of the Planter, he had a number of jobs, from waitress at a fancy hotel to rigger and stevedore. Smalls liked being near the water, and he was also given about $1 a week to spend as he pleased. He also sold fruit, candy, and tobacco on the docks, which shows that he was a business. He saved $100 this way. He had hoped to buy his freedom with it. Instead, they put all their hopes on getting away on the Planter on the night of May 12, 1862. It started when the three leaders went ashore, which was against the rules, but they did it a lot. They left the slave crew on board. Smalls had been waiting for this moment and told the others to get ready. Only 2 of them left him. They got the boiler going, but before they could head out to open water, they had to meet up with another ship, which meant going in the opposite way as slowly and quietly as possible. They would pick up their families there, like Small's wife and kids. He had married another slave named Hannah and had a daughter named Elizabeth in Charleston. Even though they were allowed to live together, they were always afraid that anyone could be sold at any time, and they would be split up. Smalls went to Hannah's boss, Samuel Kingman, and asked if he could buy his wife and child. The price was $800, and Robert Jr., their second kid, would make it even more expensive. Hannah agreed with Smalls that escaping was the best way for them to stay together, and she said, "I will go because where you die, I will die." Close encounters. The Planter turned around with 16 slave men, women, and children on board and began the most dangerous part of its trip. As runaways, everyone faced harsh punishment or even death if they were caught. The engine noise and smoke made it impossible to get through Charleston Harbor without being seen, so Smalls knew the ship had to look like it was on a normal patrol. That meant going past 4 military posts and armed gun batteries on the shore, all of which could have blown the Planter out of the water. To look like the captain, he put on the captain's coat and hat and walked like the captain. This was because the American Civil War had been going on for 13 months, and Charleston was a key port for the South. The North put a naval blockade on the whole Confederate coastline, so Union ships were stationed just a few miles away. Smalls knew this because the Planter had been turned into a ship with guns, so it could carry weapons for the Army. When he got away, it had 4 guns and 200 pounds of bullets in its stores. Smalls wanted to get out of slavery, so he tried to do it in the middle of a war and on a ship he could give to the enemy. He had spent the last year learning as much as he could about how the Planter worked and what signs he needed for the checkpoints. He put on the captain's coat and hat and walked like him that night so he could stand on the deck and look like the captain from afar. The Planter went through Castle Pinckney, Fort Ripley, and Fort Johnson without any problems. The last stop was Fort Sumter, an intimidating fortress on an artificial island with high walls and a lot of guns. The rest of the team wanted to make a wide circle around it, but Smalls said that would make it look more suspicious, so they went straight towards it. He gave the signal around 4:15 a.m., and a few seconds later he got the all clear. He blew the ship's whistle as they went by to say goodbye to the Confederacy. There was still one more risk. If the planter was carrying the Confederate flag, the Union blockade could shoot at it. Smalls had forgotten about this. It was quickly taken down and replaced with a white bedsheet flag. The planter then went up to the USS Onward. After a few tense minutes, Smalls was able to tell the Union soldiers what was going on, which shocked them. As the other slaves came on deck and started to celebrate, he turned over the ship and said, "I'm delivering this war material, including these cannons, and I think Uncle Abraham Lincoln can put them to good use." Liberation at last. Smalls had done more than just bring a ship. He had also freed himself, his family, and a dozen other slaves. In the North, where newspapers and magazines spread the news of his escape, he was praised as a war hero. Smalls got $1,500 as a prize for getting the planter. Because he was so well known, he talked with President Lincoln, and may have been a reason why black soldiers were allowed to join the Union Army. A reward was put on his head in the South. This was not the end of Smalls's story, but the start of his life as a free man. The first thing he did was join the fight for the Union. He fought in many Marine battles, like when he was in charge of an ironclad and helped clear mines that he had been forced to lay for the Confederates. Smalls did well enough in the end that he was given charge of what is now the USS Planter. This made him the first black captain of a ship in U.S. service. After the Civil War was over, he decided not to start a new life in the North. He went back to South Carolina instead, where he had been a slave. After he learned to read and write, he became a successful businessman and opened a store for freed slaves, a school for black kids, and a newspaper. He also got the rank of Major General in the state militia at the end of his time in the service. Black soldiers of the American Civil War. Not only did freed slaves and runaway slaves fight for the Union, but they also fought against racism within the Union. When Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, it freed more than 3 million slaves in the Confederate South and let black men join the Union Army to fight for the North. By the end of the war, about 180,000 people had joined the Army, and another 20,000 had joined the Navy. Together, these people made up about 10% of the Union troops. People in the Army served in separate groups called United States Colored Troops. Even though there were stories of bravery in battle, like the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry at Fort Wagner, white leaders didn't usually trust them to be good fighters. Also, if they were caught by the Confederates, they were more likely to be sold into slavery or treated much worse than their white comrades. Before an act of Congress in June 1864, black soldiers did not get paid the same as white soldiers for their service to the Union. Black soldiers got $10 a month, minus $3 for their clothing, while white troops got $13. Robert Smalls was used to hard times like this because he didn't get his service pension of $30 per month until 1897. Continuing the fight. During the Reconstruction period after the war, black men got their first chance to run for office, and Smalls was one of the first to do so. From 1868 to 1870, he was a member of the South Carolina House of Representatives. In 1870, he was elected to the Senate. By that time, he had already shown that he was willing to fight for black rights. When he was taken off an all-white streetcar in Philadelphia in 1864, he organized a mass protest that led to integration on public transportation within 3 years. As a politician, he helped write a new state constitution, started the Republican Party of South Carolina, and ran for office to improve education and social services. Smalls was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1874. He served for a number of years that were not all at the same time. But the hope of the 14th and 15th Amendments that black people could find a place in the United States as citizens who could vote was short-lived. White people in the South took away black people's rights, made laws that were hard on black people, and attacked black leaders. Smalls was falsely accused of corruption and taking bribes, and he was sentenced to 3 years in jail, but he was later released. By the end of the 19th century, it was almost impossible for black people to vote. So Smalls's speech at the South Carolina Constitutional Meeting of 1895 was one of his last political acts before he lost his job. His words were, "My people don't need a special defense because their history in this country shows that they are as good as anyone else." All they need to win the battle of life is a fair chance. He never lost that hope, and he was always kind. The house in Beaufort, where Smalls lived until his death at age 75 in 1915, is a good example of this. He bought it shortly after the Civil War, and sometimes an old woman with dementia would come to the door thinking she lived there. Henry McKee, his old master, used to live in that house. The woman Smalls took in and took care of was McKee's wife. The history of slavery in the United States is very painful and traumatic, but Smalls was able to leave in more than one way. We hope you liked this video. Subscribe to the channel if you're a history addict, and please let us know about civilization or time period we should talk about. Also watch another video here.